So we set up like a tunnel.
Yeah, I remember that tunnel. Yeah,
it was like milk crates, right? There was you would set up so the hose would go, and then there would be like a milk crate here and a milk crate here. It would like a milk crate all the way to the door, and then on that milk crate we had like draped banners to build the tunnel so that all the air like would go through.
Yes, I do remember that. Oh man.
First of all, tell me, how did you actually get involved in all of this, right? Obviously, as far as being a caster is concerned, how did that sort of even come about to begin with?
Yeah, I guess looking casting directly, that would have been about 2014. So I've been running LANs. I was playing Source and went to my first LAN in about 2011. That's kind of where I picked up a couple of things, helped out a LANs as a result afterwards for the emerging CSGO scene. I think in 2014, it was at one of the Sydney LANs. That was like the first time that someone did a very basic casting setup. Jumped on and people were like, hey, you're decent at this, or you're pretty good at it. And that's kind of where it all started. So it was just mainly doing it all the local LANs at the time, the Battle for Sydney's with Kameen. And that kind of eventually led up to ACL Sydney back in 2015. So that's kind of the prelude, not the beginning. Yeah, I would look at it.
Did you ever see yourself as having sort of like a quote unquote career as a commentator? Because I think it's fair to say, like, even though you're at this point now where you've almost, I guess, retired, so to speak, from esports or from casting, you did have a good probably 4 or 5 year period maybe where you were casting either as a hobby and making some income from it, or almost even as a full-time role in some cases. So was that ever something that you sort of thought about when you sort of started watching games and esports and stuff?
No, not really. I mean, a lot of the time when I first started watching esports, it was actually StarCraft 2. It was the first one that I really watched and I was really involved in. And that was, I never thought I would be a commentator. So even back then, what is it, the Team Down TV and all that things, every single time those things would come up on Cybergamer, I'd always look at it and go, oh, I don't think that's for me. I don't think I'd be a good commentator or anything like that. I don't think I have the aptitude or the ability for it. So it's been a bizarre journey, obviously ending up now looking back. Never, like at the beginning, would I have thought, like maybe a pro gamer, sure, events, ops, yeah, but not a commentator at the beginning.
All right, well, talk to me about like actually starting casting. I mean, the first one that I kind of want to touch on, the first event that I remember working with you was ACL Sydney. So this was an interesting one I think for both of us in a sense, because this was actually one of the first CS events that I properly attended. Like I'd done a couple of events here and there. And it was, I think, kind of like your first proper cast, so to speak. I mean, there might have been some stuff here and there, but this was like, I mean, this was a qualifier for, I think, ESL 1 Cologne 2015, if I remember rightly. There was at least some kind of international qualifier attached.
There was, yeah.
So it was a sort of a big deal, and at the time, it was actually quite a big deal. So one story that I have from you, because I remember casting with you, and I remember you being quite fresh, or at least to me, it seemed that you were quite fresh because I'd been casting for a little while before then. I'd been doing League of Legends even prior to casting CS. So I felt like I was hot shit, and obviously in hindsight, I was a piece of shit. Like I was not very good, but I knew the ins and outs of casting to an extent. And then along comes this guy called Kevin Zhu, and he just, he's casting, whatever. And I just remember you one time throwing to a break without a cue, and it really pissed me off because I was like, wait, who the fuck is this guy? He's come in and he's just thrown to a break. Like he doesn't even know what he's doing. Like how's he even gotten this job? So where were you at, like in terms of your casting career when you got to that point? Like, did you have any idea what you were doing, or were you just in there to have a good time?
I think it was like mainly there to have a good time, mostly. So there was no formal teaching, no formal technique, no anything behind there. So it was just raw, pretty much just raw enthusiasm backed up by the fact that I kind of knew a bit of Counter-Strike. So I was, like to use the word unprofessional, 100% at that point because I had no idea what was going on. We joke about the dad suit to this day, but that's one thing because I didn't own a suit and we were still wearing suits back that time. I don't miss those times, truthfully. But yeah, I was just there to kind of have a good time. So that was probably the first professional-like setup that I had casted at. And definitely looking back, way out of my depth, right? 100%. Like if you got me running cables or doing any of the floor stuff, that would probably be more within the spectrum of my job, or even doing the server stuff. Definitely not commentating. It was way too early on. And this is probably going to be a segue to the next part, but I found out pretty quickly it was way too early.
So I think after that point, obviously, things kind of felt like, at least for me, they sped up pretty quickly. We did a couple of ACLs. We did ACL Sydney, then we did ACL Melbourne.
Yes.
And obviously, very quickly after that point, we had Crown, the 55K Invitational, which was, I felt like, kind of the event that put Counter-Strike on the map in ANZ, because this was the first event that had international teams and players coming over to compete. Obviously, it was quite a big deal. And it seemed like really what kind of kickstarted CSGO as an esport within ANZ. But talk me through ACL Melbourne and Crown 55K, because obviously you didn't end up working Crown, but
No, I didn't.
it was kind of a big deal for all of us at the time. I think we went into ACL Melbourne, at least I don't know if this was from your perspective, but for me, I remember going into that event and kind of thinking about it as like almost a tryout or like a test run almost for like who's going to get picked for Crown, because we sort of knew that it was coming. We didn't know, I think, necessarily what it was, but we knew something was coming. So we were like all trying to put our best foot forward to sort of get picked for this role. You obviously did not end up getting picked, but there was, I guess, some fallout maybe. What was this all like from your perspective? Talk me through, your reaction to all of this going on.
Yeah, so obviously after ACL Melbourne, that was a very tiring one. I definitely remember that event, not just because of the long hours and everything, with the fact that we had to fly interstate and nothing was really covered at the time. So I was like pretty poor as a student and everything was being covered. Like nothing was being covered. So kind of like I was staying all the way out in Frankston, traveling up about an hour and a half north. I think the initial fallout of not being, going back a little bit, sorry, in terms of, did I expect it to be a trial or anything like that? I think I semi did, but it was still kind of half. Like hadn't done anything online between that. So I think there wasn't really much time, even though there was time difference there, I had not really done any casting between that time, between Sydney and Melbourne. So when it eventually got to Melbourne and it was completely done, exhausted after this event, and the first thing that you're told when you get back is, sorry, you're not picked for Crown because we don't think you're professional enough. The first feeling is always going to be, it's going to hurt, right? Because you go like, well, hang on, I've traveled down on my own dollar and stuff like that. What do you mean by unprofessional? Because that obviously is a very critical word. It is highly critical, and it's not something we use very often even these days. Like unprofessional in my mind is like, okay, like I was caught doing drugs or something like that, or being completely out of line.
Yep.
And I would say, and if I did something like that, fair enough, throw me completely off the broadcast. There's no tolerance for that. So that was like, and we're all young back then. So I think it was Command that had to explain to me, and poor dude, because we're obviously close. He was the one that had to cop it. And it was a lot of frustration. It was a lot of, I'm not going to lie, it was a lot of anger, a lot of frustration as the initial kind of thought process. And then that was kind of like, I had two choices to make at that point. It was either I thought I was the most amazing caster and everyone else is wrong, and I was professional, I was better, and there's some weird agenda out to get me.
You wouldn't be the first caster to think that, though.
Wouldn't be the first caster to think that, or alternatively, I could harden the fuck up and actually take it as a lesson and go, what actually is the point of that, and go learn from it. And after looking at in retrospect, it makes a lot of sense. I don't think I would have used the word unprofessional. I would have said you were too raw and you needed more experience. You need to focus more on commentating and not running around the event. You need to understand what your role is. I think if better direct feedback was given, there'd be a lot less anger and probably better direction. But hey, like I said, we're all so new back then. How can you give, that accurate feedback when no one had experience?
It's funny because like even at the time, the people giving the feedback probably didn't have the experience required to even know what was needed. Do you know what I mean? Like in a sense of, I think none of us as casters at the time really had developed into the profession that casting was. We were just doing it almost as a hobby, doing it, I was doing it because I thought like it was fun. I wasn't doing it as a way of income. Like you said, we were paying our own way to these kinds of events and stuff like that. And like ESL Australia didn't exist at that point. That Crown event was kind of where ESL Australia almost began. So a lot of that staff there were like almost still doing it as volunteer or had only just gone into full-time work in that. And, no one really had experience. So it is funny to me because like, I think I would agree with you that quote unquote unprofessional probably isn't the right word. I would say maybe like at the time unpolished was something that you could use to describe a lot of us, because like we just didn't have the experience, we didn't have the reps, we didn't know what we needed to do to actually be quote unquote a caster. We just did casting because it was fun, and that's obviously a bit of a trade-off. But obviously, I think as a result of that, I want to talk to you about like maybe your motivation and your momentum in terms of your casting career, because I feel like you took a little bit of time off maybe after ACL Melbourne because. Or, I mean, A, was it because of this, or B, was it because there just wasn't that much to cast? Because I recall, obviously, there was Crown, but then, like, was there much else going on?
I think it coincidentally, it fell, like, that Melbourne event, as well as everything else, fell at the same time I was finishing off my degree. So I was finishing off my bachelor's that year. And I went, okay, I'm going to finish on focusing on my bachelor's first, and then I'll worry about the next step kind of thing. So I knew that there was going to be time. Obviously, it hurts missing a big event and stuff like that, but I went, look, I'm going to focus on making sure I pass my degree first. So that was like thesis writing, and you don't really have time when you're doing a thesis and stuff like that. So it was very much, okay, 2016 was the goal. And because I had a pipeline in terms of what I was going to do, I still had ADSL 2 back in 2015. I was still living in Campbelltown. You can't really do casting on ADSL. You just cannot. Right. So it was a matter of technology. It was a matter of getting into the right place and reframing and going, okay, I'm going to start from scratch again, pretty much. And that's like 2016. That's why there was a bit of a break and why I kind of like fell off towards the end of 2015, didn't go to Crown and stuff like that. Cause obviously it wasn't in my budget to go back to Melbourne and to go view, was it Immunity getting very close against VP or beating VP? What was the story again?
Immunity beat Cloud9.
I know, that's right.
And then lost to Virtus Pro. And got very close. They got very close against Virtus Pro, and Renegades obviously lost to Virtus Pro as well in the final. But anyway, I mean, obviously you didn't work that event, so it's not really worth breaking down too much. But let's talk about getting involved with ESL, because like as you said, obviously going into 2016, that was the year that you looked at and said, this is where I actually want to try to make this something. So how did you actually get back in with ESL? Because obviously you were working with ACL, so you did have some contacts there. You've obviously mentioned Kameen as well. Was he the one that kind of brought you into ESL? Because I recall I was working at ESL at the time, but I don't think I had really anything to do with bringing you on in terms of...
I think it was Ben.
Into casting.
I think it was Sandman. I think it was Ben. So kind of like what happened there was I just did a lot of CGA, CGM stuff. Literally just did the reps, right? And that's why whenever I say, look, you just need to go cast more games, it's because I had to go do that. I was doing maybe 2 or 3 AM or main games every single week, and eventually got to the point where I believe CGP season started, like the next one, and Steve Cyanide was like, and I applied for it, I think I applied for it. I was doing it with Hectic at the time, all the way from WA, and yeah, so that was... kind of did CGA, CGM, then did CGP, and got reamed by Steve, as all of us have probably have during their casting career, but like in a very constructive manner. Like, or anyone who's known Cyanide or Steve would know that he would lay into you with some of the most foul-mouthed language, and then he'd follow up with genuine points, and it was up to you to take them or not. Like I can already hear Steve. Like you can probably hear Cyanide in your head right now,
because he would say something like, "Well, that was pretty shit, wasn't it?" or something, and you'd be like, "All right, like okay."
But and this is the thing, right? Because if he ended it there, I would have been like, "This is terrible." But he actually did the entire production and stayed there and went, "Here's a 3-page document on why you were shit." And that was the whole thing. It was a constructive document, not just going like, you're bad, do better. It was actually things such as, when you're talking about this, why are you diverting to this tangent? You should focus on here. When you're bouncing, make sure you give like all the points on actually how to be a good caster. We were doing that in CGP, and we're getting live feedback directly from one of the most experienced people inside Australian esports at that time. So, and we did the live event there at CGPL when it was still held at... Or that was
ATP?
Yeah, it was still held at the ATP, yep. Which obviously can't run anything there anymore. But yeah, that was, I believe Ben came around for a little bit. He casted one game, and I still remember these words. And I think it was after that cast, Ben just turned to me and said, "Kev," something around these lines. It's like, you are literally 100 times better than what you were back at Melbourne. Wow, kind of thing. And I was like, I was really happy with that. And also I was like, I have so much still to grow, because just doing those kind of events made you realize on how hungry you were to kind of improve. And that's like, I realized afterwards, actually, I'm really hungry to drive and improve as a commentator. So at least I knew with Sandman's words, with Ben's words, this is definitely a step in the right direction. But I'm just going to keep my head down and keep working at it. I'm not going to demand anything. I'm not going to go and say I deserve opportunities, because no one deserves opportunities. You earn them, and then you get the call up. And then I got the call up for ANZ champs.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit sad almost kind of hearing you talk about it the way that you do, because it's making me think about what it's like now versus what it was like then. So back then, you know, obviously, like you said, there was all these kinds of events. Like we all did these local circuits. There was ACLs, there was Cyber Gamers, there was even at a later point, there was Australian Esports Masters, which was like the CG thing later on.
Yeah.
But there isn't really that anymore. Like, what do you cast now if you want to be an up and coming CS caster in ANZ? I guess Bris Vegas to an extent. But like it doesn't really feel like there's that same opportunity necessarily. But anyway, look, talk to me about the impact of, I guess, having that kind of mentorship, because again, I'm thinking about it from the perspective of today, and I feel like there isn't really anyone like that anymore. Like, is there anyone that is directly involved with training casters up right now that is giving you that kind of feedback that is valuable and actually relevant to your ability as a caster? Because it seems like that was quite important to you in terms of your ability to grow as a caster.
I don't think so right now, because none of us are really doing it in that capacity. So I've definitely offered advice to some of the up and coming casters and talent over periods of time and everything. So it fully in mind, going, hey, I've received a lot, I should give back some. But it takes two parties, right? I've offered a lot of times, it hasn't always been taken up. So, which is, for me, I just go, that's completely fine. But then I'm also not surprised when I also sometimes see the commentating stuff start to struggle. Because I know that not to sound like a complete cockhead, but I would know that if I was someone that was young and upcoming, I would definitely be asking for a ton of advice from someone that has probably done a couple of circuits and has a proven track record, has offered for free to help out. I'm not the one, if I was up and coming and I reached out and they didn't say anything on it, but sometimes I've actually reached out to up and comers and actually offered, hey, do you just want me to do even just a demo review or VOD review or things like that, and just go over it. So I don't think it exists anymore, because the market it's become fast paced, and I think it's become cutthroat. Looking a little bit into it, it's very competitive. So, and I never really viewed it as a competition, which is probably why I sucked at doing it a lot of the time. So, like, it's hard. I'll get bitter and pissed off about things, but I won't be like angry enough to the point of, of like starting to hate people and going, I'm not going to talk with this person again because he got an opportunity over me, kind of thing. I'm just happy for them.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, talk to me a little bit about what it was like casting at the time. Obviously, getting brought into ESL. What was it like? Just being a caster. Did you sort of feel like you'd made it? Was there a lot of money going around? Did you feel like you were getting good opportunities? What just generally just describe what it was like to be a caster at ESL, like say in 2016.
2016.
Yeah.
So during all those studio broadcasts, this is ANZ Champs season
ANZ
2,
Champs, yeah.
Not season 1, season 2.
Yeah.
And that was when you were living inside the funhouse, if I remember correctly.
No, I think
or you were flying down every now and then.
2015, late 2015 might have been the year where I was. No, I was hired in 2016. Yeah, you're right. It would have been 2016. I would have been flying up and down. And then obviously halfway through 2016 is when I actually moved to Sydney. So
yeah,
from June or July onwards in 2016, I was living in Sydney.
Yeah. So, because I remember like that was a period where I was still driving from Blacktown to Auburn the entire time. So it was definitely tiring, because that was just after either I had university, I was doing my Masters at the time, and I'd come through and then try to smash out a broadcast, drive home at 10, 11 o'clock at night, because those were late studio broadcasts, no pay whatsoever. A couple of weeks where I went, oh, I'm down to my last $10 kind of thing. So like legit $10 in the bank account, stressing about how I was going to make it work and things like that. But I got a job roughly around the same time, so that alleviated a lot of pressure. Definitely didn't make it at that point. Money was tight. We weren't getting paid. I was getting experience inside the studio and getting reamed every single time. And it's like, what are you doing with your hair/shirt? Which to this day probably still happens. I just have the most messed up hair. And also, I don't spend as much time in terms of actually cutting it, probably as much as I should. So, yeah, definitely hadn't made it at that point. But a lot of good learnings in terms of how to operate in a studio environment.
Yeah, I think that 2016 and even to an extent 2017 kind of period was a very busy period in terms of improvement for everyone that was working at the time, because it was like you go from zero to doing a studio show. Ultimately, with enough reps, eventually you're going to be starting to learn something and you're going to start to improve, and something's going to happen.
EB Expo 2016. That's a prime example of, I think the feedback should have been there. It's like, Kevin, why the fuck are you still talking? Shut up and just close the show towards the end, because we were calculating tiebreakers and I just didn't shut up. And I think even Ian was just like,
He would have been done for
Sniper
sure.
would just been like, I just want to throttle this kid. So that's one of the most important learnings. So it was just learnings throughout 2016, 2017, pretty much.
Obviously, you do a lot of work with ESL over that year, and I felt like to an extent, like 2016, 2017, there actually were a lot of opportunities going around for CS casters at the time. I want to jump forward a little bit to 2017, because obviously IEM Sydney was quite early in 2017, so this was like in May 2017.
Yes, the first one,
for those that remember. So when you heard about IEM Sydney, did you sort of think, what did you think about that? Because, being a caster in Australia at the time, did you ever have any hopes or thoughts of maybe casting IEM Sydney at the time?
I think I had like some hopes or whatnot, because we were already doing, I think we started doing Pro League that season as well. So I think it was already, okay, there might be some potential of us doing it. But also realistically, I went, this is what my second full year casting properly. Like I've only got 1 year of experience. IEM is completely different compared to an EB Expo, as well as what we did at PAX for ANZ Champs, right? Not saying there weren't bad products or like but they're different tiers, realistically. So I knew that I still wasn't ready for IEM Sydney at that point in 2017. 100% I wouldn't be ready. So I was like, cool, it'd be a nice bonus. But it was a double-edged sword. Because if they gave you the opportunity and you mess it up, you would mess it up for everyone in Australia. So I'm kind of glad at that point that I didn't get offered. I can't remember. I don't think none of us got offered. And probably it was a good thing, because none of us were really ready for it yet.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think...
Maybe you were, but I definitely wasn't.
I think I could have done it, but I don't know that I would have done an amazing job. Even to this day with arena shows, I'm still a bit like, like, am I there? Am I really there with an arena show? Maybe, maybe not. Sometimes on my day, yeah, but definitely, I think that for me is probably still something that I'm feeling like I need to work on. But anyway, besides that point, so IEM Sydney 2017 rolls around, whatever. Don't do that. That's fine. But in that meanwhile as well, during that year, it seemed like I think you were still running LANs and you were still kind of doing your own thing, because I was looking up Karath Sydney Lan. It's even got its own. It's got its own Wikipedia page, So this is pretty serious stuff, right?
Oh man.
So you're hosting LANs. I mean, how was it like at the time? Because I don't know if you could. I don't know how many teams you had there. Whether it was 16 or 8.
16. Yeah.
16.
I ran a couple of 8 teams, couple of 16 teams. I was running LANs all across.
Do you think you could? Do you think you could pull 16 teams nowadays to run to a community LAN at an internet cafe?
These days, potentially.
Really?
I think there's a definite potential. I can't remember before I had to cancel mine in 2021, but I'm fairly certain I had at least... I got 8 teams for CS, if not 16. I can't remember the exact numbers, but there were a couple of times throughout that entire period in 2016, 2017, I put sign-ups, and within 4 hours, we had 16 teams in Sydney, and that was the peak. 2016, 2017 was the peak golden era of, I would say, grassroots, of everything like that. So these days it'd be a lot harder, because I believe that there is actually less at the top for people to believe in, and the goals have changed. And this has always been a problematic factor for me. Now, this is a bit of a tangent, but going on to why grassroots isn't as sustainable, I feel like, anymore, is because a lot of the up-and-coming players, sorry to throw them into the, in front of the bus, have lost sight of why they're grinding the game. When I was grinding on game, I just wanted to get better to play at a high level. I remember at 2018, 2019, the conversation started shifting to salaries. And the goals had changed. So when I looked at it and I went, people are now... there's nothing wrong competing for salaries, but if your goal is to get the bag, then you're looking at the wrong way. And I feel like that is why less people are incentivized to grind the game now, is because now that everyone thinks about financial stuff. It's double-edged blade. So I know it's a bit of a tangent, but that's why I feel like it's not going to happen as much. What do kids got to play for these days?
Okay, so then moving on from that, or actually even almost tying into that, like at a certain point in your career, community management kind of became what you were doing. So you were, I don't know, were you like inadvertently like developing some of those skills at that time? Do you think by running these kinds of events?
All the bad skills.
Okay.
So it was if I had a 2016 or what Karath was doing for outside of the structurally, it was fine. It was just everything else, like managing players. Like I wasn't managing players, I was screaming at players. So it was just all the bad things because I was already cranky, tired, and I was just taking it out on players most of the time. Especially when they'd go for a smoking break and not rock up in time, because no one wants to be at a LAN cafe at 3 a.m. I don't want to be, you don't want to be. I've already been there since 6 o'clock in the morning. So when someone's there, like taking a little bit longer, when I've said explicitly, I learned very quickly with that community management things, what not to do, pretty much from what I did in 2016 and 2017. So I guess it was, already early on, it was like some form of community management, event ops and things like that. So, which... yeah, I made a lot of good friends actually through that as well, and I knew how to talk with players and connect with players and everything. That's why I felt like the LAN events always went so well, is because all the people that have run successful LAN events always had that touch of human contact. It always felt like you could chat with them, they believed in the same goal and things like that. Even looking at MC, LAN and things like that, yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's jump back to casting because, as you've mentioned already, you were doing ESL Pro League. I don't know whether that started in 2016. I think it actually kicked off around 2017.
It'll be in the beginning of 2017, I think. Yeah.
So, you know, obviously this is still pretty early on in your casting career, and obviously this is about the point as well where you started to form a duo with Pilly. So Pilly had just sort of been brought in, like you were obviously around a little bit prior to his addition to the ESL casting team, but you guys ended up, for whatever reason, kind of getting put on a lot of broadcasts together. And, you know, one thing leads to another, you just end up being like a duo. And I think you ended up being quite happy with that. But talk to me about forming a duo with Pilski. You know, did you know him before then? Because I've obviously done it in retrospect with him, and I've heard this from his perspective. And he said, you know, like, he didn't really know you guys. You guys didn't really know each other, but for some reason you were like always up late together, like playing games or like having DNMs or something like that online.
Yeah.
So did you guys have much of a rapport before you started casting together?
Yeah, we had a decent amount, because I say decent amount, like not an insane where we were playing lots of games together or best mates or anything before that. But I believe I chatted with him like 2 or 3 times online, like a decent amount and things like that. Because obviously he had a different alias before and I've known him for a while. And so I was just talking with him about that, and one conversation led to another. And we just talked for like 2 to 3 hours. And it just turned out the philosophy and what we had thoughts on were very similar. And I was like, hey, I kind of like this guy. Like, he thinks pretty similar. He's a pretty chill dude. So when I got told by Kameen one day, it's like, by the way, you're casting with Pilly? I'm like, oh, awesome. Like, this is really sick. I guess, like I said, we would spend more, like, let's spend more time together or catch up or do things. I guess this is a different way of doing it. And yeah, that's kind of where everything kicked off. So, which was good, because we got along since the beginning. And even now, like, we still get along pretty well.
What do you think about Pilski as a caster?
Trying to find either nasty words or nice words to say about him at the moment.
Well, do you think he's a good caster?
He's a good caster. The problem is he is a good caster in the dying art of being a color caster. Color casters don't really exist. I struggle to think of someone that's got the depth of knowledge as well as the ability to read the game, like Pilski, like Sniper, truth be told. And that's kind of why, yes, he is a good caster in terms of that role. But that role is slowly dying away inside esports. Like, your color casters now need to be hype casters as well. And they need to be hybrid. I feel like that's just been the modernization of the game. And he's getting there. And I think that is the only lack inside his casting game, is the ability to truly play by play. And that's not really his fault. It's just the way that the commentating is gone. I don't think he's ever claimed to be a play-by-play caster. And he's tried his hand at it. He tries really hard. But that's like going, hey, Kev, be an analyst. It's like, I can't be an analyst well compared to Ian or compared to Mitch.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a personality thing. I think that's something that people need to recognize. And I think to an extent, it's the same thing with players, right? Every individual has their own personality, right? And Pilski's personality is not hyperactive, it's not over the top. And obviously, that isn't necessarily conducive to being a play-by-play commentator. But yeah, I mean, look, obviously, you guys were able to form a pretty good duo. So let's move on to talking a little bit more about ESL Pro League, because there was one very infamous incident that happened when you were casting ESL Pro League. Were you ever intimidated casting ESL Pro League? Did you feel like it was a really big product? Like, obviously, at the time, that was the biggest product that any of us really were working on. So was there any nerves ever working on that product, or?
100%. Because that was, I mean, even now, I still treat it as like a pretty professional product compared to some of the grassroots ones that I've done, right? Like, as in, I treat different products and different scales of severity, and Pro League I would still treat really seriously. So yeah, like it was always going to be a part where going like, okay, this is what we're going to do today. This is how we're going to improve. We want every single day to be better. Really taking it hyper seriously. I remember Mitch and I would always be talking about what could we do better after this cast and stuff like that. What did we do poorly here? Giving feedback directly in breaks, like going in with the right amount of energy. So yeah, Optic, really
Well,
unfortunate.
yeah, I guess since you bring it up, obviously the green wall came down upon Danny Kim, but actually it was you. So
And actually, it was Mitch, as
Yeah.
you might have, go back and listen to the in retrospect with Pilski. It was definitely him, not me.
yeah. So can you walk me through the circumstances as to what happened?
I don't know. Like, I still vague. I can't even find the VOD these. I had to go back and deliberately dig for
I think
it.
it was on Facebook.
Yeah, that might be why I haven't been able to find it. But apparently it was, we were laughing at one of the Inners players. Optic were losing really bad this series. Yeah, I think it was Gage, Inners player. He wasn't using any utility. So Mitch was making a bit of fun with it. And I think I was just laughing along and then just going, yeah, but like, you can't do this. This is Pro League. Like, Optic really need this victory kind of thing. It definitely could be construed as like we're picking on a player, especially because Gade was the new pickup for Optic at the time. Optic were doing that NA experiment, so I think Magisk was on there. A couple of good EU talent had come over to NA to actually play in that Pro League. So for NA Pro League. So yeah, like definitely I understand that they got pretty upset about it, but to elevate it in that way to threaten, I heard apparently they threatened to drop out of the league if we weren't dropped. I don't know if that was true or not.
I have no confirmation on that.
Yeah, like I have no confirmation. There's just a bunch of different rumors because obviously it was like a Twitter post. We're laughing at it, and then someone's going, "Hey, you need to come in to a meeting because, or you need to be pulled aside." I think it was it you or Kameen that pulled aside and said, "Hey, this happened. This is pretty serious."
I can't really recall. Like, I obviously remember being involved in the conversation internally as to what had happened, and I looked at the VOD myself, and I remember people sort of talking about like what should we do, or what should the repercussions be, or this or that. But I think I wanted to sort of stay out of it because I was like, this is maybe a bit of an awkward situation for me, obviously being your colleagues. It's not really my place, I felt like, maybe to necessarily reprimand you or whatsoever, but I think I was more than happy to kind of leave that to Kameen or Ben or someone else. But that came directly from like Joe. There was an email, I remember, that I was able to see. But what were like sort of the repercussions in the end? Do you remember? Because I don't actually remember what
there was literally
was.
Zero repercussions. Like, it was the weirdest thing because this is going to lead on to the next thing, right? Was that obviously they're just like, you can't do this, you got to treat it with all the severity. I think a week later, it's like, congratulations, you guys are doing IEM Sydney. So I went like, this is a joke. I'm sorry to say. You can't just reprimand and then go, you're doing the biggest. So was that actually meant to be a reprimand, or is it someone just, we had to do something?
I think it was probably that.
It was like, we just had to look like we were doing something. They've been reprimanded, they won't do it again kind of thing, because it was just some dude kicking up a fuss. And the way I look at it, I go, if it was genuinely something serious, once again, it would have been taken a lot more seriously and there would have been severe repercussions. Like, we still learn from it, but I just look at it and I still go, it's kind of like it was a semi-joke, because you can't say that you're reprimanding someone then give them a big opportunity the next week. That's not how reprimanding people works. As much as good work we did before, if we seriously did make a mistake, don't tell us then we're doing this huge event afterwards.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's like, maybe you did sort of go over the line, but it wasn't as if like it was. There are some things which you can't fuck up on a broadcast, You can't go on a broadcast and, you know, make some kind of racist joke or some sort of insensitive joke or homophobia or anything like that. There are certain lines which cannot be crossed.
Yeah. This was definitely nothing close to even that. We weren't
Sort of
making
BMing a player is like not like, you know, like it's like it's a bit of a gray area. It's like
it's
probably
uncool. You shouldn't do it. It's uncool. Definitely shouldn't do it. And it's definitely like, depending on how well you know the player or whatnot, it can go into the line of, okay, definitely shouldn't be doing that and stop doing it. But it's not like all right, we're going to inflict some major repercussions.
All right. Well, there was one other little tangent that I wanted to go on because I remember at the time the air conditioning broke in the ESL office. So cast your mind back to what this was like because
it was in summer.
It was summer. It was a grind. You were doing these online shows, getting up in the morning, and then you'd be sitting in there and you know, no aircon. It was like, what, 40 degrees?
Because studio lighting. So
lighting.
This was during that week of heat wave because I remember it. Because I remember walking out to my car after 5 o'clock after the entire thing was done. And I'm sitting there in my car. I'm going, wow, the temperature is reading 48 degrees in my car right now. And I've been inside of a studio which has been 40 degrees. It's on the top level. It's a warehouse, so it's not the best insulation. Look, everyone was suffering there because aircon wasn't working for the entire top floor. So I'm not going to say that we copped it worse because we had people in production that would have been dying in there as well. People that had to even just focus on meeting the stuff like dying in there. But definitely it was a very challenging task with studio lighting, bright lights, 40, 45 degrees, and trying to still look presentable and trying to go through a 7-hour day pretty much.
Do you remember like the contraption that we had set up?
Yeah, it was the portable aircon, and it was sitting so on the table. If the camera's there, the table's obviously there. I was always on the left hand side because I was play by play, or no, actually, the right hand side because I had to do hosting because Mitch couldn't.
I think he would have been on the right hand side.
Yeah, I would have been right hand side because I would have been hosting, or left hand side if someone else was hosting. But there was a little portable aircon that was on the right hand side, and it was getting at least some airflow. And it was being vented out, not into anywhere external. It was just being vented into the kitchen. So all it was doing was shifting air, realistically, but at least it was getting some effect into it.
But the thing was, what I really enjoyed about it was such a like ratchet job because there was the portable aircon. And for anyone that's used a portable aircon, they know like they have that little hose thing. And it's probably like, I don't know, like a meter long or a meter and a half long. Can only go so far. But the doors, like this was quite a big room, this studio. You needed the aircon quite close to be getting any kind of impact from it. So we set up like a tunnel.
Yeah, I remember that tunnel. Yeah,
it was like milk crates, right? There was you would set up so the hose would go, and then there would be like a milk crate here and a milk crate here. And it would like a milk crate all the way to the door, and then on that milk crate we had like draped banners to build the tunnel so that all the air like would go through.
Yes, I do remember that. Oh man.
So that was that was just
that's MacGyver right there.
Goes to show exactly how high peak technology we were operating with in 2017 in casting ESL Pro League. It was a good time.
It wasn't really anyone's fault except for maybe like the guys that owned the warehouse because they just took forever repairing the aircon. But I
don't
remember
know what it was, but it took forever, didn't it?
It just took forever, and I just went like, "This is." I never was pissed at anyone at ESL because I was just like, everyone's kind of suffering, but I'm just going, man, this is. I do remember coming in quite a lot and asking, hey, sorry to be a nuisance again. Do you know when the aircon's being fixed? Because it is quite warm in there kind of thing. I remember asking that.
It's the last thing you want when you're casting as well.
Yeah.
Is to be hot and sweaty. Sweaty in particular because obviously you're on camera and it just gets worse and worse. Anyway, I mean, that's just a little tangent. Let's talk about like obviously, the good aspects of working at that time because I feel like that was a period where there was a lot of improvement happening, right? We were doing a lot of VOD reviews at the time. We were, I felt like the motivation level was kind of at an all-time high, right? Because we'd seen IEM Sydney 2017. We were doing ESL Pro Leagues. Yeah, admittedly the B streams, but it felt like there was a lot of opportunities. We went to ROG Masters as well that year, which we'll talk about in a second. So there was international chances, there was IEMs, there was good events. We were casting a lot. We were all, at that point, I think, starting to get to the point where we were kind of being able to do it full time. Or, I mean, obviously I was doing it full time, but you guys were starting to like there was a lot of casting, right?
Yeah, times was definitely getting
Rates
really
were
good.
Starting to go up a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I think towards the end of 2017, 2018, like rates were getting a lot better.
Anyway, my point is here. What was the drive and motivation like for you at that point in time? Because you, in particular, I think when I look at you as a caster, have always been someone that's kind of gone through like peaks and troughs, like in terms of your motivation. So this, I assume, would have been like one of the peaks where you were like really into it.
Yeah, I think because every single time, I'm a very, for me, I found that my motivation, the peaks and troughs, a lot of it comes if I have a very good goal or objective. And I think at the time, because there was so much to cast at a high level, that's why it was so easy to be motivated, because everything was new, everything was shiny. Like studio broadcast for ESL Pro League, B League, which was like B Stream, not B League, sorry, B Stream, which was still really good teams playing. Like we would still get Renegade versus Optic because it was like another. Or we were watching Fallen like at SK Gaming at the time. We were still getting those games, right? And that 2017, if anyone said it's like, oh, would you like to cast Fallen and the boys or Liquid and the boys? Or of course you'd say yes. It's a dream, right? And same with even back then with Zen League and ANZ Champs, we had 4 really, really high performing ANZ teams because everyone had the same hope. Everything was going up in Counter-Strike. So it was easy to stay motivated because everything was going up. When times are good, it's easy to be motivated. So, yeah.
Yeah. How good did you think you were at the time, like as a caster?
Like peak in 2018?
Yeah. Do you think you were a good caster?
I would say peak casting Kev would have been probably around IEM Sydney 2018. And I would say on my good day, I would probably be your equal. Yeah.
Yeah,
I would definitely say like on my day.
So
yeah.
so that's more of that. That's a hindsight perspective, right? That's what you think of you back then, now. But back then, what did you think of you back then? Does that
I was
make
below
sense?
you.
No, but when in your mind at that time, what did you think of yourself?
I was definitely the second best play-by-play caster in Australia for sure. I mean, there wasn't too many play-by-plays, but I knew that 100% I was getting much better at my crafts. I was definitely hitting a couple of strong points. I was getting the art of flow down, getting the art of point across, working with different partners because I'd worked with Ian, because Ian obviously jumped on a couple of shows and stuff like that. And he was super helpful at giving good feedback and things like that because he had much more life experience and that knowledge as well. So I think definitely, yeah, towards that way in 2018, it was getting to a point where I was very comfortable as a caster where I still have much more to grow. But this is Peak Kev is casting right now. Like, and I can only go up from here.
Well, do you know what? I speaking of Peak Kev, I think this is where I want to sort of drive the conversation in the direction of ROG Masters because this was your first international trip. I believe you went. Did you go to the Philippines?
Yes, Philippines and Manila.
So we went to the Philippines and to
Philippines and Malaysia. Sorry,
and Manila and Kuala Lumpur. Yeah, Philippines and Malaysia. So, you know, obviously that was really cool, I think, for all of us at the time. I can't remember who exactly went to each one, but I'm fairly certain Ben Green was at both. Sniper would have been at both.
Yep.
You and I would have been at both. Did Danny go on one as well?
Danny did go on one. I feel like he went to the one in the Philippines.
Yeah. Anyway.
He was a serial pest.
Yeah, it was like there was a lot of people that got to go over, do this event. You know, this was a great experience for all for the first time, or for some of us for the second or third time getting to go and do work overseas. But this event in Malaysia was the one where I was like, that's Peak Kev. Like in my head, I've you know that
the red screaming one,
the red screaming image. But it wasn't so much that, but I just remember watching you casting one of those games, and I was like, he's so fucking dialed in at this moment that like you were like laser focused. There was nothing else going on in your life apart from Counter-Strike and that one event, and it was kind of like that was my most positive memory of like a Karath moment, you know, if that makes sense. So talk to me a little bit about this whole event. You know, what did that do for your career? What did that do for your motivation levels? And, you know, were you as hyped up to be there as it seemed like you were to me?
Oh yeah, like I loved every single minute of it. So that was my first big international and first big like proper stadium cast. So obviously I had decent ones before at Supernova, everything like that, but it's completely different when you would know as well, like at a stadium or an expo when there's tons of people, tons of energy and stuff like that, completely different atmosphere. And yeah, I think that was also because I'll talk a little bit about money here. It's one of the evil necessities when it comes to it, but because the pay was so much higher compared to what we were getting at that point in 2017, I was like, wow, it's really easy to be motivated. They're putting us in a good hotel. Like, I was just dialed in for work there. Like, you probably remember, I was like, I'm not even going to go out and do anything because I'm just going to focus on doing the best I can. Like, that was literally, I looked at it as this is for work and I'm going to put everything into it. Which, you know, in hindsight, I wish I took it a little bit easier and went out to go enjoy, kind of like traveled a little bit more and gone and met a couple more people and talked to them a bit more. But I was just completely focused on work because I went, this is a big opportunity to do well and kind of to get some more experience under the belt. Yeah.
Do you remember casting with Hugo?
I do, yes.
Yeah. What did you think of Hugo at the time?
Definitely very, like, I looked at him as with more experience and stuff like that. He was really nice to us. So I only had a decent amount of chat. Like, I didn't have that much time, like a decent amount and stuff like that. I do remember after, I think the cast that we did together, I remember he said, you need to work on this part. And I went, okay, that makes sense, kind of thing. Thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it. As he's smashing down a meal, because like the man's just flown in directly. So nothing but good things to say about Hugo. So, and I've always been pretty happy when I've seen him as well as Harry succeed.
Yep.
Just, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because like I think pretty sure that's the only time I've worked an event with Hugo. It's really weird, you know, like you meet someone one time,
Yeah.
and you feel like you make, you know, you end up hanging out with them, make a bit of a connection, and then like you never see them again. Although obviously you stay in tune with their work, and he's not the only individual that like this has happened to me with. Like I've met people once in my entire life, and I've, in a sense, almost kind of kept in touch with them or kept up to date with them. But I've never seen him again, and it's a little bit sad. Anyway, speaking of feedback, and one of the things that I think maybe you struggled with a little bit at that event was overhype. So
Yes,
was this
that was the feedback. Yeah,
that was the conversation. So what was that as? Was this like a big learning for you? Was it a moment which was like kind of formative in terms of your career?
Yeah, definitely. Like it helped a lot more with tone setting and everything. So that's when I got a lot more comfortable with going, okay, like what is the hype level you want? How do you use tone? What language do you use? How do you change things up? So when you're casting, every single experience can be better for the. So it was almost like the final piece. I think it was in how casting should be in my. And I think that was the final part. It slot in alongside with a bunch of other things, and that was it. I had the framework to work towards. I wasn't perfect at doing it, but I knew what framework I wanted to work towards to make sure I could go toward quote unquote perfect cast.
Mm-hmm.
So,
what did you think about the red photo? It's the photo that, I mean, look, I'm going to be real. I'm probably going to use that photo as the thumbnail for this episode. So if anyone's wondering what that photo is, that's the photo that I'm talking about. Is the thumbnail for this episode. So,
I think that's classic Kev, right? That's like Kev, yeah, like not really the OG Kev, yeah, but definitely I think it's one of the more defining features where you can see how much I'm giving into it. And it's not as if Hugo's like slashing off and stuff like that. You can see it's just like, I don't, he's in the background, but he's enjoying himself kind of thing. So I think that's like very much like quintessential Kev. Like at his best, that's how much like passion and energy he bled the esports. So
exactly, and that's where I see Peak Kev in that photo.
I just wish it wasn't so red.
Not much you can do about it. The lights were red. That was a very red event.
It was,
remember. Yeah. Speaking of red, actually, this is a good little segue, good tangent. Gfinity 2018. So we're moving ahead in the timeline a little bit, but Gfinity actually drops into ANZ around 2018, and
it did, yeah.
This was an interesting time, I think, to be a caster in ANZ, particularly a freelance caster. Now, obviously, I never had any involvement with Gfinity because I was still internal at ESL at the time, but it was still something that we were quite aware of and quite cognizant of, and I think, you know, it was obviously an opportunity for you and people who were casting CS at the time, but didn't it take a little while for you to get into Gfinity? Was there like a season, or were you on the first season?
I was on the first season pretty much. So I guess I got in because this is way back when I was starting to do commentating again. Jim Nesso, James Cowan. So he was doing a couple of amateur stuff back then, or like helping out with some of the grassroots things with like 60. I can't remember the exact name of it, but they were doing a couple of shows from the showgrounds in Moore Park. And I was invited to do it as an amateur caster, and I've always had a lot of time and love for Jim, obviously over even since 2015, 2016, had nothing but love and respect and really hold him to high regard as one of the leading figureheads inside Australian esports. He invited me to do GFin, I think, because, or I think it was Starseer as well. Like, they all kind of knew who I was at that point. And the biggest thing was, I think there was a discussion going around, there was a rumor, which was, at ESL, if you went to work with Gfinity, you couldn't work with ESL again. It was just a rumor, and I have to make that really, really firm. This is not like one of the things where it was ever confirmed or stuff like that.
I can comment on that because obviously, again, at the time I was internal with ESL, and to my knowledge, as the quote-unquote head of talent, that rumor was not true in the talent aspect. If you were talent and you went and worked with Gfinity, that was okay. But if you were a production crew, say, for example, an observer or an admin, someone who, to an extent, kind of had some sort of intellectual property from ESL,
yes,
then you would definitely be looked upon negatively by going to work in a freelance capacity. Any full-timer was not going to be able to do it. But if you were a contractor, for example, I think the main thing was just basically, did you have any kind of quote-unquote industry secret that you could take with you?
Yes.
A caster, I mean, maybe, there's some aspect of the show that you could take with you, some sort of fundamental of the broadcast, but generally speaking, you're not going to really take much outside of your skills, your abilities. So it was, obviously, as we know in the long term, because you and Ian and a couple of others, Mac obviously came from Gfinity, ended up working ESL and Gfinity at the same time.
I think for me, it was because ESL had given me a lot of opportunities. I felt like it was very inappropriate just to go like, all right, I'm just going to go work in the show without even clearing it. And I remember like going in and just going, hey, look, this is what I heard. Is it okay? And they completely okayed it. So like that was one thing. I've always been very firm on respect and things like that. And I think that's probably why I was able to do it in the first season, was because from the get-go, I actually went to approach Vanzetti and Kameen and I said, hey, like, I want to talk about this. This is the reason why, stuff like that. Because, yeah, like I said, ESL had given a lot of opportunities, and I felt like it would be pretty poor form if I at least didn't clear it.
Was there ever a point where it was the other way around as well? Because I had heard, and again, this is not something that I can necessarily confirm or deny, but I had heard that Gfinity didn't necessarily want to use the quote-unquote ESL talent. So was that ever a thing? Did you ever feel that?
I'm trying to remember back, and I can't recall, to be honest. Because obviously we're working with some like established talent in terms of from media and things like that. But I can't remember if there was ever like something that's like, we're not going to work with anyone from ESL. Because I know that was Mac's first or Geordie's first big show, and because he was doing a lot of ECA stuff at the time, he'd never really touched anything big ESL. Like he wasn't doing ANZ Champs with us at the time.
He did Gfinity before he did ESL.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and I think Ian came on afterwards. So yeah, it was very much, I'm not sure if it was like a direct avoidance of anything from ESL, if it's coincidence or stuff like that. You know, mate, I've always been quite friendly with a lot of people, so I can't really say towards if there was anything happening in the background and things like that. So,
sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, one of the other byproducts, obviously, of Gfinity coming in was that the talent rates went up.
Yeah, true.
So, obviously, I think in hindsight, we would probably, as freelance casters, now see Gfinity arriving as a good thing.
Yeah, I think because it set the day rates as a standard, because before that we were still getting paid hourly rates. So I think that was the introduction of day rate standards and everything like that. It was the introduction of starting to get pretty decent wages. I'm not going to say it was like insane, pardon me, but it was definitely much better. Like I think doing one Gfinity show would have paid more than doing, and a Gfinity show would have been 4 or 5 hours, 3 best of ones. Would have paid better than working like a 7 or 8 hour day doing ESL Pro League. So definitely it was much better and palatable, things like that. So yeah, I think it was good overall for the industry to at least finally start going, hey, it's acknowledgement that we actually do contribute quite a lot to the product. Because I think it's always been that constant argument, do casters, I mean, even recently, I remember this Twitter, and I think the guy unfortunately worded it really poorly, and I understand what he's trying to get at, but like casters do want to add value to the product, and we look at ways of adding to the value of the product. We want to make it watchable. We're not just there for shits and gigs and to have a good time. We're there to really go, I want to entertain the audience and I really want to enhance the quality of the product. That was definitely, it felt good finally going, I've worked pretty hard for this. It's gone up to reflect increase in experience and I'm happy with this.
Did it help you to become a better caster? Because I remember watching that show, and actually, you know, in hindsight, it was maybe the most professionalized broadcast in ANZ.
It was,
at the time.
yeah, it was. I mean, they had a full-on. Their production crew was nothing like. Not talking bad about anyone once again, but that production crew had like a lot of experience doing like sports shows and stuff like that, and they just had a completely different set of gear from what I remember back in 2018. And I was like blown away. I'm going like, wow, I had a concept of what a production room looked like, and then you walk into one of those and you go, okay, like now just dial up to the tens pretty much. So it was really interesting working with talent like that who were established talent but knew nothing about esports, and they're like, they just come up to you and go like, you're an absolute natural, absolutely love it and stuff like that. And that was so good working with talent like that because they build you up and you have a lot of respect for them because it's like, yeah, this guy's done acting for a career. He's done all of this stuff, has a lot of stage experience and whatnot. And they're happy to give tips and they're really cool to be around. And this is just overall a really professional production. This is like nice kind of thing. Like a different kind of professional. I'm not saying ESL wasn't professional. It was just like a very different level and it was very interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously, the big talking point for 2018 is always going to be IEM Sydney. IEM Sydney 2018. This is where we all kind of got to cast for the first time. I can't remember. Was the duo was you and Pilly, and then myself and Brainstorm, and Sniper was on the analyst desk at the time. So talk to me about basically getting the offer for IEM Sydney. Was this, you know, a big moment for you, or were you really hyped up? Did you feel like you deserved it? Did you feel like it was coming this time around?
Well, remember it came off after just getting reprimanded for saying stuff about optics. So it was obviously a little bit like, okay, pretty funny that we got it. I remember laughing with Mitch about it a little bit. It's like, wait, like we're getting now the offer for IEM Sydney. Okay, cool. And then it hit it. It's like, okay, we're doing IEM Sydney. So obviously a lot of focus going into it and stuff like that. B stream doesn't matter. We're still doing IEM Sydney. I don't care. I'm here to do an amazing job. I'm here to, you know, cast Bntet's like flashbangers into Nana where somebody gets like a 5-man.
Yep.
So
also that's an interesting one that you bring up because you know how I have Peak Kev in my head as ROG Masters. When I talk to Pilly, that is his Peak Kev moment.
Yeah.
It was you casting that Bntet round. He always brings that up. He always gushes about it.
I mean, I literally just copied what like I'm fairly certain people have realized I literally just copied word for word almost what Bardolph said like years ago.
Yeah, like
it's just different. You can't do that. This is like this is not a pug match or stuff like that, which is well, it's true, but it was adapted. I guess it was always a good line. You can't do it in a pug. This is like it's IEM Sydney. But it was a good line. I thought it was good, so I took it, and it kind of worked.
You guys only did the online component, or not the online, I suppose, the studio broadcast side of it, but you didn't end up doing an arena show. So were you like a bit disappointed or perturbed at the time, not getting to work in the arena?
I think I was pretty pissed, honestly speaking. And you know, like looking back on it honestly, it was. I think it made me more bitter as a person as well for a little bit of time. And then I realized like it was actually, after I retired for the first time, it made me realize like how stupid it was to be bitter over something where it was no one's fault. We only had so many limited spots.
There was basically, I think the situation was there was 4 pairings at the time, and there was 6. Was there 6 arena games?
Yeah.
2-2. Oh no, they were in 5. I think there was 2-2-1. Anyway, all I remember was that there was one game in the arena allocated to the local duos.
Yeah.
Which obviously was the Renegades Mouse Sports game that Tim and I ended up doing.
Nifty 50. Movement boy. One of my favorite lines from Tim.
I mean, if we're talking about peak, that was peak Tim. Like that event was peak Tim.
So good.
That was
I honestly love that.
That was the best I ever heard him cast, and fuck me, like if he would have cast like that every time, he would have been one of Australia's top casters for a very long time. But he didn't cast consistently that well. That was, I think, part of his issue. But anyway, I mean, maybe I'll do it in retrospect with Tim. I think it would be pretty interesting, actually, considering he's still in Sydney. Maybe I can get him in and we can talk about it. But yeah, the thing is, there wasn't that many opportunities, like you said, for local duos. And it still is a bit of a thing even to this day that anytime one of these events pops up, someone always sort of seems to miss out in some way, shape or form. And obviously, unfortunately, at that point, that was you guys. So, what kind of impact did that have on you? Like you said, you sort of were a bit pissed about it. Did it kind of nosedive your motivation a little bit?
I think it's deflated a little bit because like those are the moments you kind of live for, right?
100%.
Obviously, like you want to do this, you do, like the stadium cast and whatnot, but I just went, that's fine, you know, like I'll see, like I'll still focus on what I needed to do at the time. We still had to do the ESL Women's Open at the time, which quite interesting. That core lineup still just won the ISF, which I'm just like, Jesus, like really talented team there. Like the only difference I think is minus, no, Bibi wasn't there at the time.
Bibi
that was
wasn't
Riv's
there.
first event.
Yeah.
And
it's Connie and Artemis are the
Connie,
core.
Artemis, and Hope, wasn't it? Yeah.
Hope, Connie, Artemis,
Chicken
Hope,
loaf.
Riv, and Razy were the 5.
Razy, yeah. Oh man, that's a name. I miss Razy. I miss Razy a lot. Yeah. Still can't believe that Connie is still playing. I'm just like, and still like fragging it up. Like, honestly, really inspirational crew. Like, that's kind of like why I was not that pissed, because I went, look, if I come into this and then I have friends in here, I have like upcoming talent. I really wanted to help build up like the female CSGO scene at that point. Let me make sure I do my best for that
like,
one.
You know what's funny is, like, in hindsight, actually, that event, I think it was called the ESL Women's Sydney Open or ESL Sydney Women's Open, something like that. That event, like, almost feels like it was the blueprint or the prelude to Impact, because that's I feel like that was exactly what Impact was.
It is, yeah, it was.
Before Impact existed, because it was at an IEM event, you know, obviously at this big event where everyone's going to go, and then it was in a expo hall type area with a bunch of seating, and it was on a stage, but it wasn't like obviously the big stage, but it was, yeah, I mean, it was actually kind of a cool event. And I mean, ever since then, we haven't really had anything like that in Australia, which is a little bit sad. But I remember there was quite a few teams. I think there was 4 women's teams at
4.
the event, and it would have been like an 8-team closed qualifier or something like that, and probably more open qualifier. But yeah, I mean, times change, unfortunately. Doesn't seem like stuff like that really gets pulled up in ANZ anymore. Probably too much money. But yeah, anyway, we'll move on from IEM Sydney 2018. And, you know, this is a weird kind of period because, like, it feels weird for me to be saying this, but obviously after IEM Sydney 2018 and throughout 2018, you see it sort of took a step away from casting a little bit. This was like the first retirement that you had.
Yeah.
Which is a very weird time to be retiring, right? Because it seems like you're at the peak of your career, right? You've gone through 2017, you know, you've had these learnings, you've gone overseas a couple of times, you went to Philippines, you went to Malaysia. Obviously, ROG Masters was right at the end of 2017 in like late November or December, something like that. And then we go through to IEM Sydney, and you do IEM Sydney, and it's sort of, you know, you're doing Gfinity. It feels like you're at the peak of your career. This is, I mean, very clearly in terms of opportunities and exposure and whatever, and ability probably as well, you were at the peak of your career. So why did you decide to quote unquote retire?
So going towards the end of 2018, that was the year I had to make a couple of decisions, right? So that was when my then partner graduated. So she would go on to full-time work, and I went, okay, like I can't do this forever. Where is commentating going to realistically sit for me in 2019 and 2020? Can I pay for everything? Can I do all the stuff that I want to, money-wise and stuff like that? And the answer was no. Like 2018 and 2017 should have been like some of the best paying years, right? Like up to that point. And I looked at my numbers afterwards, and I went, I am working another casual job, like decent hours there. And I enjoy that job. I was at the library, and I'm doing commentating, and I'm getting something like under 35K. As one of Australia's better commentators, as someone that was supplementing that commentating income with just casual work, I was still like 35K is underneath like minimum income.
Yeah,
realistically.
I think minimum wage would have been 36, 38, something like that at the time.
So, and I'm going, is it going to get better from here? And the answer was at that point still no. I had some issues with stuff that was happening in that stage. I remember, like, I just had a feeling it was like, it just wasn't growing to the same amount. It had stalled. I had a couple of fears about where the scene was going, and I was starting to get a little bit tired of it as well. I think it was like, okay, look, I kind of need to go have a break. I need to go get a full-time job. Need to go and do a couple of other things, and that means I have to quit commentating. Because I need to, unfortunately, commentating won't be able to really pay the bills. And unfortunately, a lot of the commentating that did pay the bills at the time was all around kind of hours that you would normally work. Like you look at Pro League, that's 9 to 5.
Yep.
You look at even like ANZ Champs, 6 to 10, 6 to 11, or even 5 to 10.
Your call time would have been 5, 4.
Exactly. So, like realistically, you're going to be really exhausted most of the time if you do it. So, okay, I'm going to go find. I need to not really grow up, but I need to now start looking at other things at that time. Like going into 2019, especially because your partner is now going into. I've been with her at that point for like 5 years, 4.5 years. So it's like, okay, like I got to take it pretty seriously. I can't be working for 30, 35K each year.
You felt like there was like this external pressure, and you'd gotten to a point in your life where you couldn't really justify being a caster anymore, because it was like, you know, it was something you could do as like a side gig or as a hobby or whatever while you were studying. But at a certain point, you know, you reach an age where you're like, life now needs to start moving.
That's correct, yeah.
And it wasn't moving at that point, I guess.
Yeah, and I needed, life needed to go on, and I was like, okay, cool, like I will move on with that. And that seemed like a correct time. It was at the high of everything. I always like leaving on the high of things, which always like going out on top. And I think that was like Brisbane Supernova. Definitely a good way to end it, considering where that would have been one of like the last lands for CSGO for like one of these local ones, which, you know, looking at it now in hindsight, didn't seem like it. But I remember meeting so many people there at that Queensland LAN as well. Like Natty was there helping out with a Dota tournament. Like talking about like the amount of talent that even came out of that event for the first time as well. So yeah. It was definitely a good time to go out on a high. So
it was a time where it really felt like it would never end. Every season there was a LAN, you know, there was like, even at some points, those were 8-team LANs in Brisbane, in Melbourne. Did we ever go to Melbourne? I can't remember. Anyway, there was like 8-team LAN.
We did. Yeah. Melbourne for, first, what was it for the first? Melbourne Esports Open. That's
Melbourne
the name.
Esports Open. Yeah.
But it wasn't ESL. It was.
That was Extremesland.
Extremesland. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it Extremesland or was it?
It was an Extremesland Oceania qualifier, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
It was like the OS finals of Extremesland. Anyway, at the time it just felt like, you know, there was so much going on and it would never end. And yeah, I mean, you know, in hindsight, it was like those were the days, man. You know, like it's really kind of sad now, especially with, I mean, how things are going in 2023. There's a lot of stuff that is not yet announced. Some things are announced that are like, oh, that's a bit disappointing. But back then it was just like event after event, travel everywhere, overseas, you know, IEM, MEO, blah, 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 this and that. Like everything was firing. It felt like it was like, I honestly really do feel like 2018, 2019 were like, those were the years to be a caster in ANZ. That was the good times.